Greetings, everyone. Hi there. I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome again. Once again, we're going to be doing our next chapter, chapter 6, in our thing of reading Machiavelli's Prince, the series of this. So far, I think we're going through this slowly, and I think it's been going this. Again, I'm using the D'Alvarez translation of The Prince. Here's my battered copy. You can. There's a link on below, which takes you to the Waveland Press. I use it because this is the one it's the one that as a graduate student, I was exposed to, and I found it to be one of the better, even though there are different good literal translations out there. This is a very outstanding translation of the Prince because it makes you go slow. It forces the language as such, the structure of the language, how he's translating it, forces you to read it slowly, and therefore this is. I know some people would argue, well, it's too complicated. It's awkwardly constructed. It should be smoother. But if you, the danger of that is if it's too smooth and too easy to go through, you just glance right over it. Today's topic in chapter 6 is about the question of the new Principate. Okay, the new Principate, and it says of Principates, of new Principates, which are by one's own arms and virtue acquired. So they're acquired by your own arms, and by virtue. Okay, this is a new Principate. Someone who's creating a new one. Now, again, this has 8 paragraphs. This is a little longer than the previous 2 chapters. Hence, this is the first time we'll get to the holy new thing. Okay, so there's 8 paragraphs. The first paragraph goes, "No one should be marveled at my way of speaking of a wholly new Principates, those in which the prince and the state are alike new. I shall bring forward the greatest examples." Now, this is an interesting thing. I have to say, since semicolon, he's going to say something now here. This is kind of one of his principates, no, one of principles of the nature of things. He goes, "Since men always walk, as they were, in the ways beaten by others, and proceed in their actions by imitation, being unable to keep holy to the ways of others, and unable to measure up to the virtue to those whom you imitate, a prudent man ought always to enter into the ways beaten by great men, and imitate those who have been most excellent, so that if your virtue does not reach up to there, at least to give some odor of it," semicolon. And now this goes, in other words, okay, now I want to finish the paragraph because and he goes, in other words, if your virtue doesn't reach to that high, it reaches close to it. Some odor, some smell of it. It's like, the odor of a thing. You smell like it at least. And he goes, and to do as prudent archers do. Now he uses the example of archery, right? Who, when the target they propose to strike appears very far off, and knowing nicely how much the virtue of their bow can do, they place their aim much higher than the intended target, not to reach such a height with the arrow, but so that they may, by aid of so high aim, obtain their purpose. In other words, you aim higher to hit there, right? Again, this is the idea of the prudent. In other words, you know the virtue of your bow, you know what you can able to do, and therefore you take your aim. You know it's far, far away. You couldn't do. It's not if you do it this way. The strength of the bow you need that height in order to get that far to hit your target. So therefore, the prudent archer is the one, in order to hit his target, knows that knows the nature of the bow, knows how strong it is, knows how best to help it so that they can reach the target and hit the target. This is the nature of men. In other words, men follow the path of others. Where monkey see, monkey do. Okay, Most people follow, and therefore we often trodden the path of other people. So therefore, he's saying, if we're going to be imitating people, why not imitate the great? Imitate the great. They imitate the great leaders, the great rulers, the great people. If we're going, and even if our virtue isn't good enough to reach that great, we would at least have the look of it, the smell of it. In other words, he's saying the odor of it, right? We'll get some image of some look as though you're it. You're not necessarily, you don't have it, but you're close. You get the look of it. You get the smell of it, the odor of it. He uses the text, right? And therefore you aim high, not to hit the high, but you hit the target you want. Okay. So therefore, what is the target? Achieving great things, achieving good things. So the great examples, these are the great ones. And in the second paragraph, he says, I say then, in holy new principates, where there is a new prince, one finds them more or less difficult to keep according to whether the one who has acquired them is more or less virtuous. In other words, if you need to be virtuous. In other words, you need to have, and virtue means here skills, the skills and abilities that are necessary. And we'll talk about this later, what virtue means. He'll go into greater detail, but here it is like the idea here is that you need virtue. You need virtue here. You need virtue. If you don't have virtue, you're not going to be successful in that sense. And because I'll continue, and because this event of a private man becoming a prince presupposes either virtue or fortune, it seems that the one or the other of these things mitigate, in part, many difficulties. In other words, virtue and fortune can mitigate some difficulties. Nevertheless, he who stands less on fortune better maintains himself. In other words, if you're going to be you're a private man, you're going to become a prince, right? Virtue and fortune can mitigate some problems, but it's better, in part, past difficulties. Mitigate some past and many difficulties. Fortune in that, but nevertheless, he who stands on fortune, those who stand less on fortune, not more, less on fortune, more on your own, more on your virtue. If you stand on your virtue, it's better, and less on fortune. If you rely on your virtue, not fortune, to do it, you're going to be what? You maintain yourself. Things are also facilitated if a prince is constrained by his lack of other states to live there personally. If you don't have any other place, you're stuck. You have to live there personally. So therefore, if you don't have any other state, you're a private man becoming a prince, and you're going to become prince here. You don't have any place else to live. You're there, and you have to be there, and you have to manage things on a day-to-day basis. Okay, you can't just let it go and go off someplace else. You take over the other place. This is the only place you got, so you're constrained by necessity to go live here. Okay, so that ends that second paragraph. Now, third paragraph. But in order to come to those whom have become princes by their own virtue, and not by fortune, I say that the most excellent are Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, and Theseus, and the like. Now, Moses, from the Bible, the father of Israel, the man who, God talks to him and he gives us the 10 Commandments. And Moses brings the 10 Commandments to the people and leads them out of Egypt and back to form Israel, right? Then what? Then it's Cyrus, the great creator of the Persian Empire. Romulus, the brother, Romulus and Remus. Romulus, who kills his brother Remus and then who builds the city Rome, right? He forms the city of Rome. Then Theseus is the great son of a goddess, I think. I can't remember. He is the great. He's the father of Athens, right? He is the god. He's the one who does the quest to go and. Is it? I think it's what is it? It's the story of. the Titans, right? Now I forget that he sends them on a quest, and he goes to Theseus goes to, I think, Crete. Yeah, the Crete, Minos, or the Crete, and that he's with the princess, and she's going to be sent to be sacrificed to the the Cyclops, and she goes with him, and he escapes. Right, he goes back, and he becomes the great. Theseus becomes the king of Athens, right, and forms Athens. Now there's always two. Athens has two myths: Theseus' story and also Athena. The children of Athena, right? But we have here is we have 4 examples and the like. Now it's a weird thing, but D'Alvarez has a good note here. In legendary mythical characters of these men's lives should be noted, right? He goes, of these men, Cyrus seems the most historical, modern meaning of the word, and also be included phrase "and like" is an indication which something in chapter 14. There will be certain kinds of men who, like Xenophon writes about, such as men as Cyrus, Moses, Romulus, etc. One wonders about D'Alvarez wonders with the relative status of Xenophon to Cyrus. Who is being imitated, Cyrus or Xenophon Cyrus? In other words, who is the Cyrus here? Is it real Cyrus or is it Xenophon Cyrus of Cyropardea? And therefore, is he relying on Xenophon? I think that this is something that we will think about now, and though one ought not to reason of Moses, not to reason of Moses, of he having been a mere executor of the things that were ordained by God, though he ought yet to be admired, if only for the grace, the gift, which made him worthy to speak with God. Okay. So therefore Machiavelli says, we shouldn't pay about Moses. Since Moses really didn't do this, God did it. We shouldn't mention Moses. But then again, maybe we should, because God, he merits God's attention. Okay. In other words, the great are those who do great things, but also those who merit God attention of the divine, right? Merit attention in that sense. But let us consider Cyrus and the others who have acquired or founded kingdoms. You, and I think this is you, is the personal you. Yeah, the Curdy. Sorry, no. This you is the courteous one, so it's a more formal one, not the informal one. You will find them all wonderful, and if in particular actions and orders are considered, they seem not discrepant from those of Moses, who had such a great preceptor. In other words, we shouldn't talk about Moses, but Moses is interesting anyways. Let's talk about Cyrus and how great Cyrus's founding of this great empire is. But then, what Cyrus does is the same thing Moses does. Okay, so he backhands us back, and who had a great preceptor. Now here is who's the preceptor of. If God is the preceptor who does the thing for Moses, right? Is Xenophon the preceptor for the thing of Cyrus, or who is the preceptor for Cyrus? Had a great preceptor. That line's hilarious in that sense. It's again, I'll repeat that. He goes, "You find them all wonderful, and if their particular actions and orders are considered, they seem not discrepant that from Moses, who had so great a preceptor. And in examining their actions in their lives, one sees that fortune provided them with nothing other than the occasion which gave them the matter into which they could introduce whatever form they pleased." In other words, fortune only here. In other words, the only thing that fortune gives them is the occasion. In other words, what is the occasion? In other words, In other words, fortune here, the only gift of fortune is that there's an opportunity. The occasion that permits them to what? Introduce something into the form. Do something. He says, let's read that line again. Not that fortune provided them with nothing other than the occasion which gave them the matter. The matter is the people, right? Into which they could introduce whatever form they pleased. The form is the order. So there you have, and I'll continue after a semicolon. Without the occasion, the virtue of their mind would have been extinguished. And without the virtue, the occasion would have been in vain. In other words, no occasion, then they couldn't exercise the virtue. But if they did not have the virtue, then the occasion would have come in vain. In other words, this is the intersect. What he talks about here is the intersect of fortune and virtue. Fortune at best will only be the occasion. But if you don't have the virtue, you can't maximize the occasion, make use of the occasion. And if you don't have the occasion, your virtue can't be exercised. So therefore, it's the intersect of occasion and your virtue, the ability to exercise, the ability to execute it and accomplish what you want to do here. And again, the example of this is that, in other words, the matter. In other words, you're having the occasion is having this matter that you can put the form you want to it towards, shape it, make it the direction you want to make it. This is the founder. This is the lawgiver. This is the founder of cities, the founder of new orders, the founder of new modes and orders. Okay. Now, in the next chapter, in chapter 3, I think. No, let's see. No, this is chapter 4. Not chapter 4. I mean, we're in chapter 6, and it's paragraph 4. And he's now going to give us he's going to go through this and gives the examples. He's going to give the examples of what happened, what was the occasion, and what was the matter, and what was the form. Or he says, it was necessary then for Moses to find the people of Israel in Egypt, enslaved and oppressed by the Egyptians, so that they, in order to escape their servitude, would be disposed to follow him. So what is this? The occasion here is that the Israelis are in Egypt, enslaved, and are enslaved in such a way that it's horrible and they don't like it, and they want to leave. Okay, and they would be willing to listen to him, to escape that servitude. They are disposed to follow him. It was both fitting that Romulus not remain in Alba, and that he be exposed at birth, so that he might want to become the king of Rome and founder of that fatherland. In other words, he not to stay where he was, not to be exposed at birth, and not to stay as he was, but to leave and to found something new. He makes it possible that Romulus becomes the founder of Rome in that sense. And it becomes needful that Cyrus finds the Persians malcontented with the imperium of the Medes, and that the Medes soft and effeminate from a long peace. So therefore, that the Persians are malcontented with the imperium of the Medes. The Medes who are their stronger ruler, but the Medes are what? Soft and feminine from a long peace. And therefore, that is the opportunity that Cyrus has to establish his empire. Now, Theseus would have been unable to demonstrate his virtue had he not found the Athenians scattered in the countryside. So therefore, this is, in other words, he was a hero who then saw that the people were scattered in the countryside, and he unified them and created them a thing. These occasions, therefore, made these men happy, and their excellent virtue made the occasion known. Whenceforth their fatherland was ennobled and became most happy. In other words, the occasion was that the situation that allowed them to exercise their virtue. Their virtue made the occasion made them happy. because they're able to exercise their virtue. Their excellent virtue made the occasion known, he's Machiavelli saying here. And because of this, the fatherland, their fatherland, was ennobled and became most happy. The thing that they create a fatherland, they create a community, they create a body politic, they create a community that wants to that becomes all of a sudden happy. In that sense, they're benefited from this idea of this great, and it becomes most happy. He answered, they're ennobled and become most happy. Now paragraph 5, page 33, last sentence, before we go to page 34. These men, and those like them, who become princes by virtuous ways, acquire the principate with difficulty, but they hold it with facility. And the difficulties which they have in acquiring the principate arises, in part, from the new orders and modes that they are forced to introduce to found their state in security, period. So in other words, the problem is creating the new thing. It is the introduction of new modes and orders. In other words, the introduction of new things. This is always the big difficulty. Okay? Now, it continues. And one ought to consider that nothing is more difficult to deal with, nor more dubious of success, nor more dangerous to manage than making oneself the head, the leader of something, in the introduction of new orders. For the inducer's enemy are all those who have done well by the old orders, while his defenders are all those who would do well by the new orders, and they are lukewarm. Okay, period. In other words, if I'm going to introduce a reform or a new thing, your enemy, anyone who benefited by the old rules, are your enemy. Therefore, anyone who is, in other words, in a political reform, you're going to change the policies. The opponents of the reform are those who are benefiting from the status quo, the existing system. They will oppose you, and they're your enemies. Therefore, you have a problem. Therefore, they have, and who are your friends? Well, the ones who think they're going to benefit from it. They're not sure. Now, this continues this. They're lukewarm. Okay, that lukewarmness arises partly from fear of the adversaries who have the laws on their side, and partly from the incredulity of men who do not in truth believe in new things until they firmly experience them. In other words, two things. One, because the old guys have in other words, the status quo and the people with existing power, they are in power, and they have they have the authority behind them. They have the laws behind them. If you're going to change the laws, introduce new modes, this is a revolution, or this is a real fundamental change of the thing, that everyone remembers the old laws, and everyone's going to say, no, and particularly those who benefit from them. And the problem is those who think they're going to benefit from them, because they haven't tasted them or experienced them, they're lukewarm. They're not happy, as he says here. They're what? Until they experience them. They're going to not necessarily believe in them totally. They think they do, but they're lukewarm. Until they taste them and enjoy them, and they become theirs. See, that's the thing. When something becomes yours, something, in other words, if in other words, this is why if you have an interest in something, if something affects your interest, you care for it more. If it doesn't affect your interests, or you don't, or something that maybe it's not your interest right now, but he promises is going to be your interest in the future, until you feel it, enjoy it, and it's yours, and that you actually experience that benefit or that utility, it's not real. And therefore, it's like, maybe what I have now is better than something I don't know. You know? So that's why that famous line from Declaration again, prudence dictates that it's better to put up with evils that line from Declaration of Penance. Prudence dictates that, things that are, evils that are known, as long as that they can be bared, we put up with them, right? Because we don't, and this is the thing, is until we experience the good thing, we experience the thing you're promising, it's always the people are going to be the people who will support you are going to be always be lukewarm. So this is the problem of the reformer or anyone introducing new modes and orders, is that the people who benefit from the existing system are going to be your enemies, and the people who will benefit from you aren't totally on. They like the idea, but they're lukewarm. They're not going to, they don't really, until they feel it and they enjoy it, they're not going to be as solid on into that. So what is this? And then he says, when it comes to pass, whatever one's enemies have the occasion to attack, they will do so in partisanship, and the other's defense is lukewarm. And in such mode, all who is associated with him are endangered. So therefore, the danger here is that the lukewarm knows that, oh my God, these guys are going to attack. Anyone who's going to lose it is going to attack, and they're going to attack with partisanship. Therefore, partisanship means you're my ally. If any friend of me is I'm their enemy. Therefore, a friend of mine is their enemy. So therefore, these people here, and therefore they begin. The people who are lukewarm all of a sudden have a little taste of fear of being retaliated against if I fail, if the reformer fails, and these guys strike back, and they're going to strike. So therefore, it's not only they're lukewarm, but they kind of really become hesitant, and this is the difficulty of the new prince, the reformer, the creator of something new. The sixth paragraph. And it is therefore necessary, if one wants to discuss this part well, to examine whether these innovations stand on their own or if they depend upon others. That is to say, whether to conduct their work they need to beg, or are truly able to force. Okay, now this is the problem. How are you going to accomplish something? How are you going to do the new wars? Are you going to have to beg, or can you force? Are you going to have to beg people to do it? Please come on, do it. Or I can say, do it. Are you able to do? Do you have to beg, or can you truly force? And that's an important point here. In the first case, they will always come to evil and lead to nothing. But when they're dependent upon their own and are able to force, then there is rarely a time that they are in danger. So therefore, if you have enough energy, you have enough equipment, you have enough resource, if you have enough of capacity and things of doing it, that you don't rely on other people, but you have your ability and you're able to compel others, because you have the means to compel them to do it. You don't have to beg. I can force. I have enough. In other words, there's enough. The pressure the innovator can bring, and it's that you control that pressure. It's not. In other words, it's not dependent upon others. It's his He created allies and forces and supporters that are not just supporters because they're going to benefit from this, but rather they're his friends that he's used, that owes him, that resources that he can use, that he can now spend in order to accomplish his goal. And therefore, he doesn't have to beg people. He can simply just produce the good. And therefore, what happens, this situation, he can then respond to the people who are his threats. And that because he doesn't depend upon, he won't have to rely on the people who are coming to him, who may benefit, who are lukewarm. You don't need their help. You simply just have the means. If you have the means or the resources to do it then on your own, or find the ability to get those resources, then you're able to deliver right then and there. And that is better. That's secure. And if you can do that, then you don't have a problem. He makes a case here. In other words, that if you rely on others, you're going to be always if you rely on others, you're going to always be a failure. But if you can rely, in other words, if you can depend on their own and able to force, then there is rarely a time when they are in danger. Whence it comes to pass that all armed prophets conquered, and the unarmed ones are ruined. Now this is a great line. The unarmed prophets and armed prophets. He makes the thing. Unarmed prophets are ruined. Armed prophets rule. The greatest armed prophet is Muhammad. In his own time, it's the example of an unarmed prophet is Savonarola, a Dominican friar who captured the Florentine people with his prophetic sermons, who tried to establish Florence as a Christian republic. He actually ruled the Florentine Republic with Pido Storidare to go from 1494, but he became involved with a challenge to prove his prophetic gifts through the ordeal of fire. When the ordeal never came to pass because of bickering and delays, the people blamed Savonarola for the failure and turned against him. Opposed by the Franciscans and the Pope and the followers of the Medici, he was hanged and burned in the Piazza della Signoria on May 23rd, 1498. So that's he is the classic example of an unarmed prophet. Now, again, this idea of the fatherland, right? This is the la patria in Italian. Beforehand, again, D'Alvarez's page 30, footnote 5 on this is worth looking at for your purposes. Understanding of this idea that he has this, like the fatherland. Of course, it is the land, i.e. the term meaning source, where it's composed where the province. As the patriotic song says, the citizen loves the land where my fathers died, its rocks and rills, its woods and temperate hills. One notes an intermixing of the natural and the conventional in the words of the song. And that reflects exactly what we wish to convey about the meaning of Machiavelli appears to attach to the fatherland, the patria. We note that in chapter 6, where the term first used twice. There the fatherland must be founded, and it must be ennobled and established with a certain kind of order. So here it's the first time it's used, the patria, and it's something that has to be established and given a certain order. The ennobling of one's fatherland is to be found in the orders which make it powerful, and thus secure and honored. And if powerful, secured, and honored, it cannot but be happy. That's what he ends that. Again, D'Alvarez hits it here, the happiness that he talks about, right, that earlier. So now he talks elsewhere, and D'Alvarez is good things, notes on here. But let's go back to the example of this, the armed prophet and the unarmed prophet. Now, the biggest unarmed prophet, who's the biggest unarmed prophet there is? The biggest unarmed prophet here, the biggest unarmed prophet of all times is gone. Christ, right? Christ is not how. Wait a minute, he's failed. Also, there's another thing. I would say there's another. See, Luther, he's writing at times same thing. Luther. If Savonarola fails, but that's because Savonarola enjoyed a political agenda. He took a religious idea and then made a attempt. He then to politicize it in terms of the Republic. Luther has this great reform, the Reformation. Luther could have been a great captain here. There was the occasion at that moment where if he sided with the peasants and against the princes and against the princes and formed something revolutionary, Luther could have been an armed. He's question of how armed is Luther. Luther's weapon was not. In other words, Luther's real weapon was his translation of the Bible and his hymns and the media usage that he created. In other words, the arms here does not be weapons. It happens. Weapons are a different kind. I think this is what I have to understand here: that the armed prophet and the unarmed prophet. Why did Savinaar fail as an unarmed prophet? Well, he promised miracles he couldn't deliver. In other words, the failure to ordeal the ordeal of fire led to people's broke belief, and therefore he couldn't. Once he broke belief, in other words, he was just another statesman who could have been easily then called a heretic by the spiritual authorities because of the claims he made. So therefore, while he is burned, the Republic lasts after him, and it removes the religious character of it, but the Florentine Republic still lasts until the Medici come back. So what happens here is we have a good case of we need to be careful here. The unarmed prophet is what? The unarmed prophet is those who promise things but don't have the means to deliver them. The armed prophet, like Luther, could have delivered a republic. He could have done it. But instead he didn't want to create a political thing. He wasn't trying to establish a kingdom on this earth. So therefore he did not he was not a founder in the political sense. He's a founder of new religious orders, but he's not founding in the political sense. Machiavelli is talking about the political sense. And therefore, this is the interesting thing about Luther. Luther was that great possibility of the creation of a German nation. That he is Luther is the father of the German language to a great degree because his translation of the Bible and then later the plays much later of Goethe and those other poets about the same time, around the time of Goethe, a little before Goethe. In other words, you have the equivalent of Shakespeare, Chaucer and Shakespeare in English. You had Luther. Luther is that moment of this language, the embodiment of this language, of embodiment of a culture, Germanic culture. So therefore, this is a founder. He is a founder. But it's not political. He doesn't take it to the next step of giving a body politic towards her. It is still the political form that the Germans have of the Holy Roman Empire, and all their different states of the Holy Roman Empire. And it's like the Kingdom of France. It's a disunited thing. An emperor who's powerful, but then he's really not powerful enough because he has to depend upon the different states who comprise his rule. Okay, in other words, the king. What's true about the King of France is even more true about the Holy Roman Emperor. So therefore, we leave here at that paragraph there, and at the end of it, between that when it comes the armed prophet versus that armed prophet, and like I says, when it comes to pass, that all armed prophets conquer, and the unarmed ones are ruined. For in addition to the things said, the nature of the people is variable, and it is easy to persuade them of a thing, but difficult to keep them firm in that persuasion. In other words, you can persuade the people, but keeping them constant, this requires force. You can persuade, charisma can persuade, but if you don't have the means to preserve that belief, to perpetuate that belief, to maintain and to ensure that belief, then the second disbelief happens, everything collapses. In other words, But when, in other words, for in addition to things said above, the nature of the people is variable, and it's easy to persuade them of a thing, but difficult to keep them firm in that persuasion. Therefore, it is needful to order affairs in such a mode, to order things in such a mode that when the people do not believe anymore, one is able to make them believe by force. That's a great line. In other words, this is why you have to have the force. You have to have the power. You have to have the power. You have to have. That's he uses the word force here, but it also means power. In other words, you have to have the power to do it. You have to have the energy, the power that they believe. In other words, if they lose faith, if they kind of have doubts, because in other words they believed it, but now they kind of get no. In other words, you have to order things that once the people cannot lose faith. And how they can lose faith? By keeping the structures that they can't. In other words, if they don't believe anymore, they have no other choice but to keep on going. You can, in other words, you make them believe by force. You get them on, and then you create a situation where they can't back off. Because if they can back out, or they can stop, in other words, you need them. You need the people in order to make the momentum. You need the people for legitimization, but you can't rely on them to deliver the thing. In other words, you have to have the force and the means that the forces and that will lead to the success of the thing, and the people will just come along. Like, remember that motion of that the time is just the thing, the good and bad things come along. Well, this is the same thing with what has to happen here. Once you engage in your project, you're doing this. It's your virtue and your ability and the resources tools you brought in will take you to this solution. Because once you because the people, if you're relying on the people to do it, you're begging them. Not going to beg them, you're forcing them in a sense. In other words, you're not giving them the option out. You're able to make them. That's why the line is. You have to have a set of affairs. It is needful to order things or affairs in such a mode that when the people do not believe any longer, one is able to make them believe by force or by the power you have. Now he turns to the penultimate paragraph here. In that sense, the seventh paragraph. He goes, Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, and Romulus, had they been unarmed, they would have been unable to make men long observe their constitutions. And in our times happened with Phaeagraminos of Vernola, who was ruined in his new orders when the multitude began not to believe them. And he had no way to hold them firm, no way to hold firm those who had believed, nor to make the unbelievers believe. Okay, this is good. In other words, you have no way to keep those who believed believing, and no way to make the unbelievers believe. The ability to force makes believers. In other words, if I can force you to do it, it doesn't matter if you believe or not. This is that moment in Machiavelli you have to understand. That, in other words, it's this is why the power, having power. And this is why the Italian is important. And this is why translations will differ here. The Alvarez goes with the most brutal force. But this can also be understood in the term of, that also, some translators will say this power. That why is it's the power that you have. The energy, the power of the movement. That anyone who talks about charismatic leaders and charismatic people, the energy, the charisma creates energy and enthusiasm, and the enthusiasm is an energy that delivers, and that can get people to move and act, right? And this is another thing. This is the idea that once you get that enthusiasm, to maintain it, you create a track of events which don't allow them to back off or to stop. So this is why this is, I think, is a good point here. In other words, you have, in other words, as he had, in other words, there's hold firm those who had believed, in order to make the unbelievers believe. Therefore, such men as these have great difficulties, unarmed prophet, in the conduct of their enterprise, and all their peril is on the way, and they must with their virtue surmount them. But having surmounted them, and commencing to be held in veneration, having extinguished those who were envious of their qualities, they remain powerful, secure, honored, and happy. Now notice this. So once you get, the innovator of new things, who's like a prophet, and then what happens? He's able to achieve his things. And then what does he have to do once he's achieved it? He's surmounted. One must, their virtue surmount their perils. But having surmounted them, and commencing to be held in veneration, they're being venerated, right? What? Having extinguished those who were envious of their qualities. Think of this. Next, having extinguished. Not merely defeated, extinguished those who were envious of their qualities. They remain powerful, secure, honored, happy. Think about that. It was the armed prophets, the Cyrus, Moses, these guys. They're able to achieve their things by what? By force, getting the people out in the desert. Sorry, can't go back. If you try to go back, the Pharaoh will try to kill you. They're sorry, too late. By the way, before we go, put the blood on the door. If you don't put the blood on the door, what happens? All the people who don't do that, therefore their children get killed. Putting the blood on the door is a symbol that anyone who put the blood on the door, you have to leave. You understand? Again, this is no choice. In other words, an unbeliever who did that because he wanted to be friends with the friends, but then what happens? Well, he's now forced to go out with the believer. Okay, this is a case of this example of how you use that force. In other words, how can you make the this is how you think. Well, Moses didn't have arms. Yes, he did. He had. In other words, arms are not necessarily force, and arms and power here and violence is not necessarily just the role of the prince has weapons and he can do that and his supporters on. But rather he can do it because he has set up the condition. He can use the situation itself and the force inherent in the violence inherent in the situation itself to get the result he wants. You want. In other words, you don't have to. I don't have to be necessary to one doing the dirty stuff. I can just set the forces loose that will do it. The actor can set forces loose that will produce the outcome, and I just have to be the one willing to make sure it happens and to navigate the people through it so that they can accomplish it. And maybe I will have to fight one or two people, or I'll have to fight something in order to do it. But if it's done right, you don't necessarily have to. But you have to be willing to, in that sense. This is what he means by this. Therefore, the armed prophet is the one who has the resources that they can compel. The armed prophet is able to compel. Does not have to beg. He can compel. And if they're able to do this, and once they achieve their thing, once they're overcome their obstacle, they're being venerated, you have to get rid of the troublemakers. Those who are envious of their qualities. And then what happens? They remain powerful, secure, honored, and happy. That's how we end. Now we ended the last paragraph, paragraph 8. I would like to add one lesser example. Remember the 4, he adds another one to such high examples. But it is a good one, and that if it will be taken in the proper proportion to the former. And I want it to suffice for all similar cases. And this is Hero of Syracuse. Now, Hero of Syracuse is only, we know of him mostly because of Xenophon's account, the tyrant of Syracuse. It's called On Tyrannus. It's Xenophon's little dialogue, which is a dialogue between a poet, Simonides, and Hero about how to reform a tyranny. In other words, this is Xenophon's account of Hero is kind of like a kind of a moment. Now, okay, let's go look at this last paragraph in that sense. That man from a private station became a prince of Syracuse. He was the mercenary captain, mercenary officer who became a prince. Okay. And again, he did not have anything from he had anything from fortune other than the occasion. For the Syracusan, being oppressed, elected him for their captain, whence he gained such merit that he was made their prince. And if he had so much virtue, even in private fortune, that he who wrote of him, that's Xenophon, said that for that man lacked nothing for ruling but a kingdom. Okay, that's a famous line. In 8, the quid nil elysium direx et regenium praetor regnum. This is what was left there. In other words, he put a quote in there in Latin. 2 references has been given for this quotation. One is the Justin's Compendium of Pompeius Turgis Historias Principi, a work which has been otherwise lost, and the other one is the Polybius History, book 1:8 and book 7:7. So therefore, this quote, it's not necessary to Xenophon, but it is the one there, the one who he talks about in the sense that it's the one who writes of him. Now, that's even more interesting in that sense because it is, what is it? The man who writes of him, those who wrote of him said, "For this man lacks nothing but ruling but a kingdom." That man extinguished the old militia, ordered the new, left ancient alliances, made new ones, and as soon as he had allies and soldiers of his own making, he was able to build an edifice on such a foundation, so that he endured much toil in acquiring and little in maintaining. Now that's interesting. In other words, he extinguished old militia. He destroyed the old orders. Ordered the new militias, right? The new army, new militias. Then what? Left ancient alliances, left the old alliances. Made new alliances. As soon as he had allied in soldiers of his own making, what does he do? He's able to build on any edifice such a foundation that he's, in other words, able to adhere, in other words, all the toil in acquiring and little in maintaining. In other words, he endured all the toil of acquiring his rule, and then it cost him very little. And this is how it ends. We end on chapter 6. Chapter 6 ends us with the great princes, the great examples, the great captains. Machiavelli ends us with the examples of the great captains, and the great captains offer us a kind of a role model to follow. But he also talks to us about the question of the dangers of in other words, the question of belief and the necessary having, how do we get people to believe us? Persuading is not enough. We have to be able to force people to believe. In other words, we need, because people are going to be flexible. People are going to believe because they're lukewarm. In other words, otherwise, they're going to be, this idea when you're going to promise them something, they're going to be lukewarm. Therefore, you need to have a mechanism to compel them, to force them. down the project you wish them to go down to. And here, this is where we end the for our reading today. We end with the new orders, the new modes and orders. The prince who does this, he's going to be, in other words, this discussion of the armed prophet and the unarmed prophet. All these things are going to be, will be repeated and pointed at elsewhere in the prince. So therefore, keep them in mind. Again, we're going to end. We're a little over. We're trying to keep these minutes 45, 50 minutes each. I don't go too long. Again, if you have any questions or feedback you want to ask, please put the comments in the comment section. If you liked what we did, do a give me a like button. If please do share it with a friend that you think might enjoy it, or maybe someone who you think could might like this. If you want more of what I do here, please subscribe. Please share with social media. It also helps to get people attention. The only way you get attention is people saying, "Hey, this is word of mouth. Look at this guy. He's kind of interesting, and I'm going to learn something." Well, please do. We will continue on this again soon, or the next reading, next chapter, chapter 7. But for this, have a good day and goodbye.